Okay, so what will we try and get out of this session? Hopefully, I'll help you figure out if a PM role in a startup is right for you. And I'll hopefully give you some actionable items to find the right startup and hopefully get hired there. So it's not just going to be a bunch of theory that, this is the way that startups work or this is what PMs do in a startup, but it will hopefully also be something where there is a set of things that you can actually do and actually use this information to try and find the right role and to hopefully like make this transition into product management in a startup. I've kind of assumed that a lot of the audience based on customer feedback is I mean a lot of the audience is people who are transitioning into product, and so have to make this choice about what kind of product roles make sense for them, what kind of companies make sense for them, what stage of the company makes for them, and so on. If there are people who already are product managers, then hopefully this will be something where you can kind of understand whether, say, moving into a startup role is right for you. And if you're already in a startup in a product role, then hopefully it's something where you'll kind of figure out which are the right startups for you, or whether what you're doing in this startup is actually product management or is the same as what product management in other startups is. So hopefully something that everyone will find useful, right? So standard disclaimers before I begin. All opinions and ideas are my own. And not only do they not reflect anything that my employer thinks, they may not reflect anything that anybody else thinks. This is a lot of this is my experience, and so take it with as much salt or as much pepper as you think is palatable, right? And most importantly, your mileage may vary. So this is a set of experiences that I went through, and these are my learnings. Now, startups are diverse. You may have a completely different set of experiences, and your, say, takeaway from this hopefully would be a set of principles that will help you, say, understand how to look at a startup, right? Okay, so this I've covered, which is a little bit about me. And if you want to get in touch with me, you can find me on LinkedIn, or towards the end, I'll share my email address as well. Okay. Now, what will we try and cover? So broadly, I'm going to look at three things that I'd like to speak about. The first is startups and product management, right? So what is a PM role in a tech startup? And startups, again, don't always have to be tech startups, but that's kind of how I'm bounding this conversation. And within those tech startups, what skills and mindset will help you succeed in a PM role, right? Now, if after that you decide that this is something for you, then the next section, which may be useful for you, is how startups hire. So as a hiring man, sorry? I'm sorry, did somebody say something?
No, go ahead.
Hello? Kaustubh, shall I
Please
continue?
go ahead.
Vishal, could you please put yourself on mute? Mansur, please go ahead.
Okay, all right, great. So if this is something for you, then an insight into how, as a hiring manager, I think, or as hiring managers in general, what's the approach as far as hiring is concerned? What do we look for in PMs, right? And how does the hiring process work in a startup?
Mansur, you're on mute.
Okay. Yeah, I think somebody muted me. So anyway, so can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay, great. So if a startup is for you, then what's the hiring process at the startup that you'll have to go through? And the third, which is probably the most important, is that okay, you've decided that you want to work in a startup in a PM role. You figure out how startups hire. Now, what's the right company for you? What's the right role for you? How would you go about evaluating the opportunity, right? Because a job is a serious investment as far as time and effort is concerned, and it's something where you're going to spend the bulk of, say, the next few years, and it's important to get it right. So how would you evaluate that opportunity, right? So what is it won't be covering? Okay. So first is that I'm not going to talk about startups as a space. I'm not going to tell you how to evaluate startups, whether the business model makes sense or anything of that kind. I'm not going to be talking about product management as a career in general, because I'm assuming that you've reached the point of time where you've already decided that this is for you and you have an understanding of what a PM career actually is. And I'm not going to talk about PM hiring more generally speaking, right? It's not about what are the skills that you should show in an interview, what are the kinds of interviews and so on, because again, there's a lot of material out there and I'm not trying to say give you a broad view of PM hiring. I'm trying to give you a narrow view of hiring in a startup, right? Okay, so to begin with, before we get into say the details of what working at a startup is like, I think the important thing to understand is what really is a startup, right? Because anybody who's read English media, you've probably heard so many different variations of this. You've heard of so many different kinds of companies being called startups, right? Till a couple of years ago, and I'm sure even now for some people, Flipkart was a startup. And Flipkart is a $20 billion company, which has say millions and millions of users and thousands of employees, right? So you have companies which are valued at say 10 billion, 20 billion, 5 billion, classified as startups. And you also have the person in the next apartment to you who's working with say 4 other people in his bedroom, who's trying to build something, and that's a startup as well. And in Bangalore, if you walk down the street and you ask 5 people, there are probably 3 of them working in startups of different kinds, right? So it's important to understand what exactly a startup is before you look at what PM hiring in a startup is like. And everything here is my definition, because if you look at the most common definition of what a startup is, it's how much money you've raised. So that's the glamorous element of how people look at startups. That's how people evaluate startups. It's what comes in the news, right? Startup XYZ did a Series C of $50 million or a Series D of 100 million or raised 5 million. So that's when most people hear about a startup, for the first time, right? So how do you really think about this? I mean, do you look at this and say that, okay, it depends on how much money a company has raised? You get it, think it in terms of how many employees, how old the company is, how fast it's growing, what space it's in. It's really confusing. And I think that getting it right is really important, because all of these different companies do product management in different ways, which is most relevant to you, right? So I'll give you a definition which is probably super relevant to you and which I found as the easiest way of looking and evaluating startups. And this is from Paul Graham, probably one of the foremost thinkers as far as, say, the startup ecosystem is concerned, where he talks about startups in an article called Startup Equal to Growth, and I'll give you a link at the end, as pretty much companies which are designed to grow fast, right? And it's not any company that's new, because somebody who's starting up, say, a barbershop or a restaurant, maybe, that's not really a startup the way that we think about it, right? So it's something that's designed to grow fast. Now, it may not actually grow fast because there's a lot of gap between execution and thought process, but it is something where it's designed to grow in a certain way, and it's designed to need a certain set of resources to grow in a certain way, right? And this is really important because a lot of the value that you'll get out of working as a product person in a startup will be derived from this notion of growth, right? So this is how most people think a tech company grows, all right? Which is that you start off and you do a bunch of things and you find a bunch of customers and you raise seed money, and then you do a bunch of other things, and then you linearly get your Series A, and then you do a bunch of other things and grow to your Series B and so on. And that both the value that the startup has or the company has, and let's talk about companies more broadly, as well as the output that it creates, is something that is linear with time, right? But the truth of the matter is that this is how often a tech company actually grows, right? You start off with this first phase where, and this is something that I've referenced from a fantastic article called Choosing Your Next Company by Nikhil Singhal, who's a VP of product at Facebook and who's actually seen both sides. So he's done his own startups. He was with Google for a while. He was with Credit Karma for a while, and then he's with Facebook right now, right? And he talks about the first phase, of a startup journey, the drunken walk. And the reason that it's called drunken walk is because at this point of time, nobody really knows what the startup is going to do, right? Like everybody's got a thesis, which is that, okay, this is a problem that's worth addressing. And I think I have a solution to this. And I'm going to go around iterating till I figure it out. So this is my thesis. I'm going to try something. Oh, okay, this didn't really work, or it didn't really work the way that I thought that it should. So let me iterate and let me pivot, or let me change what I'm doing, maybe a little bit, maybe a lot, and then let me try something else, right? And then I come to something else altogether, all right? And then, most companies die in this phase, right? Because very often you don't find product market fit before you run out of money. Really, the goal of the company in the drunken walk stage is that, can you find product market fit before you run out of money, right? And everything is focused towards that outcome. Everybody in the organization is just thinking about that outcome, right? Now you found product market fit, hallelujah. I mean, like, you're one of like a very, very small number of companies that has done that. Now, what you really do at the next stage is what's called product fit, which is that you've got this, now you try and scale it, and you try and scale it slowly. You try and get more customers, you try and put some process around, say, this solution that you found and this product that you're now, and you're beginning your growth phase, which is where product fit happens, right? And then you reach a certain point of time where your business model is working. You've kind of started figuring out, okay, the product works, you know how to scale it, and suddenly it's the unit economics are fantastic, and everybody wants to work with you. Everybody with money into your company, because all the pieces are there to say, just say, rocket through the roof, right? And that's where hypergrowth comes in. And this is a tremendously exciting phase. This is very often when you read about companies, when you read about them, when they raised a lot of money, you raise even when, they're suddenly the numbers are going through the roof and they're hiring aggressively. That's kind of the most exciting phase for a company. And that kind of takes you to scale, right? And that's when you're mature as an organization. You've become leaders of sorts. Maybe not the number one company in the space, but you're a leader of sorts in that space. And you've got a great business. You're now scaling that business. It's not as rapid as it was, but you're kind of dominant in a particular space, right? So this is how a tech company evolves. And so if you look at this, and then you look at the earlier way of us looking at startups, you'll find that, hey, maybe where I thought was a startup was actually a drunken walk, but it's actually also the product fit part, and it's also the hyper growth part, right? So what we think of as startups is actually companies in 3 different stages. And this understanding is really important, because when somebody's hiring for a product person, they're looking for different kinds of people at different stages. And if you get nothing else out of this particular presentation, try and take this away, that when you're looking at a company, try and look at it not just as, hey, big company, small company, or enterprise and startup, but try and look at it as these different phases and which phase this particular company is in, because who they're looking for, what you will be doing over there, how they'll hire, how your career will end up in those companies will depend a lot upon which stage that they're in, right? So just to quickly capture these 3 phases, the drunken walk is a lot of experiments. Find product market fit before money runs out. Product fit is customers like your product, but you're still figuring out the business model. The unit economics are right, but a business model is also about getting the sales model right. It's about getting distribution right. It's getting a lot of other things right as well. So what you're going to be doing is you're going to be doubling down on what's working, right? And then there's hypergrowth, which is your business model works, your sales increase sharply. There's a lot of pressure to grow when you're in hypergrowth. And this pressure is both external as well as internal. And it's external because people who are putting in money in your company want to see you growing month after month, quarter after quarter. And it's internal because now you're not just some company that nobody's heard of, you're in the public eye. And what that means is that everybody knows about you. Competitors are coming out of every corner. The large companies are suddenly aware of you. And if you don't expand, then you are going to die a very slow death. So the speed and scale of growth is really, really important. I'll just give a couple of examples to companies that you're probably really familiar with. Let's take a consumer company like Swiggy, right? Now, the drunken walk stage is when they're first out there. They're just trying to figure out this food ordering thing. They've created an app. They've got some distribution. A lot of it is organic. Maybe they are before Series A. They're trying a bunch of different things to see what exactly works. Should you do, say, restaurants doing delivery? Should you have your own fleet? What are the different things that you can try? You don't have a lot of resources, so you're just iterating with a lot of experiments to try and get to something that actually works, right? Then you reach the phase where, hey, food delivery seems to be working. People like this. There's convenience. There's, say, this experience that's new that people really enjoy, right? Now, let me focus on getting the delivery right. Let me focus on building a product that works well. I'm not going to do completely new things, but I'm just trying to get the core business to start working well. I've raised my Series A at this point of time. Maybe Series B also depends on the specific company. But I'm just now iterating on, say, something that I know that works to try and get it to scale, right? Hypergrowth. Now that's the point of time when I embrace like 20 million, 30 million, 50 million, 100 million, and a whole lot more, right? And at this point of time, I'm growing rapidly. I'm trying to get to everyone in a particular city. I'm trying to get into smaller cities. I'm launching cloud kitchens. I'm doing completely new ways of doing delivery. Essentially I'm growing and I'm innovating, right? So that's what hypergrowth is all about. And this is relevant to you as a product manager because, and this is a particularly important slide, because when you're at the early stage in a company, at the drunken walk stage, frankly, product managers do not matter, right? What matters very often is the founder or founders, and they are very often the first product managers in a company, and engineers. And engineers matter a lot because they're the ones who are doing the rapid iteration, and they're the ones who are actually helping you to get to product market fit, right? So the first, which is why you'll find very often that there'll be this 50%, 20% company in which there'll be founders and say 10 engineers, right? You won't see too many product people there. I mean, somebody may have a product manager title, but he's not usually a PM before that. He's somebody who may be doing his first PM role. He may be somebody who's, say, a friend of the founder who's kind of come on board, is doing something completely different earlier and now. Few people who have prior PM experience, right? Because a lot of the direction, vision of the company and the experiments is defined by the founders. The founders are the PMs. There are no real PMs, or not too many real PMs at this point in time. You go to product fit, and that's where the first formal product hires come in. Because, okay, you figured out something that works, but now you need to iterate on it. So you need to understand how customers think. And it's not just the 1, 5, 10 customers that you have right now, right? It's going to be 100 customers, 500 customers, depending upon whether it's like a B2B company or a B2C company, right? So here you do need somebody who can come in and organize. You need somebody who can bring in some process. You need somebody who can bring in some structure, but it's not something where a lot of innovation happens. I mean, innovation does happen, but it's micro innovation, not completely new directions for the company. So you'll find the first formal product hires here. And this is very often between a Series A and a Series C stage company. And so here you'll find people who have been product managers before. This would be somebody who was like a PM or maybe an SPM somewhere else. And he'll come on board and he'll be like the first head of product. And he'll be the one who'll take the company to the next level, right? Hypergrowth is where it gets really exciting, right? Because this is where process has to be put in place, structure has to be created, otherwise everything is going to collapse. It's just growing so rapidly, right? And at the same time, you have to innovate because you have to figure out not just the core area, but everything around and how to do whatever you're doing at your core much better compared to, say, other larger competitors who are out there. So you are well funded at this point of time, or you're generating cash as a company. So you have more resources, you have more opportunities in terms of what are the different things that you want to try. Prioritization becomes really important at this point of time. This is a lot of, say, the more classic product management, a lot of the things that you've learned that product managers have to do, which is really understand consumers well, really figure out prioritization, iterate rapidly. This is kind of an area where a lot of that happens. And very often, this is where the first product leaders are hired. So the first VP of product or, somebody who's actually been, say, a director of product somewhere else or a VP of product somewhere else coming on board to head the product team. So that's what, is usually a good sign to understand where this particular company is, right? So that's kind of, where the company is at a hypergrowth stage. And it's really important to understand this classification because this will make a lot of difference, because there are a lot of people who go into a startup and be like, I'm not really a product manager here. I'm a project manager here. I'm just doing whatever the founders tell me to do, right? It's probably because you picked the wrong stage. I mean, there could be other reasons as well, but more than anything else, it's this. Or I went into this company thinking that we're going to keep changing. I'm going to keep building new things, but I just found that we're just iterating on the small product. Founders don't have vision and so on. That's probably because you went into a company at a product fit stage. Not to say that either of these is a bad stage to go into, but it's just that you need to know what you're signing up for when you join a company. Okay. Now, all right. Now, what are the big differences? Forget the different stages of a startup. What are the big differences in working at a startup as a PM versus working at a large company? Because this is probably one big choice that you probably have to make. Now that you've understood that these are three different phases of a startup's journey, how do these three kind of differ from what an at-scale company does, right? So I've kind of divided everything north of the line as more startup-y things and everything south of the line as, say, more enterprise things. And these are not advantages or disadvantages. This isn't to say that working at a startup is great, working at an enterprise is terrible, but there is a difference in what you do and what you develop, right? And how you develop as a product manager in each of these companies. And a lot of it comes down to what are the specific roles or what are the specific challenges that each of these actually end up having, right? So first, almost with every startup, but the earlier stage, the more prominent it is, there is always a challenge as far as resource and attention is concerned, right? Resources are limited, and more importantly, your time as a product manager is limited, right? So you'll be like, hey, okay, I've got to do the stakeholder alignment thing, which is really, really important, and I'm going to be working on it. Suddenly there'll be like a bunch of customer service tickets that you'll need to try and answer as well, right? So you're going to shift your attention from one thing to another, right? So the key constraint is always resources and attention. And not to say that people in enterprises are not busy, but it is not at the same level at all. And it's not in the same set of activities, right? So if you look at the one at the bottom, which is a meeting to plan for our meeting. So that's a lot of what the enterprise product managers complain about, right? So startup product managers complain about, oh, I don't have time, I don't have enough, resources, I don't have enough engineers, I don't have enough money. And enterprise product managers complain about, I'm spending all my time aligning everybody. I'm spending all my time doing meetings. So I just can't go into a meeting. I have to, plan for this, and I have to get everybody aligned. We have a lot of resources, but if I'm going to invest in this, I'm going to have to make a pitch deck. I'm going to have to get people to sign up for it. I'm going to have to get executive approval for this. That is a lot of what you end up doing, right? Or this is a lot of what people complain about, right? This isn't to say that this is all that you do, but this is one of the negatives. So if you look at the contrast, right, there are different things that people excel at, right? So there are some people who are really good at, say, making a structured case. And for them, an enterprise role would be fantastic. There are some people, on the other hand, who really thrive as far as, say, organized chaos is concerned, who really love, say, dropping one thing, going on to the next thing. And the reason that I say that this is not good or bad is because this is a mindset thing, right? So it's not to say that, startups are great and enterprises aren't. It's that there is a certain mindset as a product manager that you have that allows you to do better with one or the other, or more importantly, allows you to enjoy one over the other. And I think that is really, really important, right? As an extension, the next thing that a product person has to think about in a startup is, which hat do I wear today, right? Okay, I'm wearing the customer facing hat. I'm also wearing the engineering facing hat. I'm wearing the executive facing hat. I have to do all of these different things. I have to, say, reply to customer service tickets because there's nobody else to do that. I have to write the stories myself. I have to write the user research. I have to write the surveys myself. So there are a lot of things that you need to do, and by definition, you end up developing a broad set of skills, right? So that is a big, big difference compared to in a larger company where there is a level of specialization. And that is something that if you work in a large company, you should take advantage of. You shouldn't attempt to micromanage over there. You should attempt to delegate and trust, right? Because there is somebody who's much better at user research, hopefully, than you are. There is somebody to help you with the project management part, who will hopefully do those things better than you can, right? So a lot of what you learn at a larger company is depth. I'm really good at something. So I've spoken, and over the course of, say, many years, I've interviewed people from both kinds of companies. And what I find is that like somebody who's worked in enterprise, amazing depth, can do some things really, really well, whether it's like being a product owner and interfacing with engineering, or whether it's, say, doing the user research bits and so on, right? But the people who come from startups are really good at breadth, which is, it just comes from what is a habit for you, right? Okay, and the third thing, which kind of is really important, is that, see, like most companies talk about, a bias for action. Companies also talk about, striving for excellence, right? And there are enough companies for whom both of these are values, but it's actually really hard to get both of these right at the same time. And there are very, very few companies who do that well. I can probably think of like 3 or 4 who actually, combine an ability to rapidly iterate with the ability to do stuff really, really well, right? Most companies tend to eventually develop a bias for one or the other. And most often what happens is that when you're early enough, bias for action becomes really important, because speed or the lack of speed kills you more than anything else. And once you reach a later stage, what tends to happen is that getting things right becomes really important, because the cost of being wrong is very high. The cost of, say, a small error when you have like 1,000 users is low. The cost of that error when you have, say, 10 million users is incredibly high. From an experience perspective, from sometimes a cost perspective, from a perception perspective, it's just really important to get things right. Say that, a large company is slow, or, like a startup is fast. This is not a statement that exists in a vacuum. It exists because there are certain behaviors that are required for success, right? And the cost of being wrong in different companies is wrong in different ways. Is different in different ways. Sorry, right? So this is something that is really important to think about. And so, what is my experience as as a startup product person, as well as a startup product hiring manager, right? So I would think that startup is right for you if you're looking for accelerated growth. And this comes back to the point I made earlier, which was Paul Graham's point, which is that startups are all about growth, right? The reason that I put a star over here is that it is incredibly risky. I mean, it's the same risk that a founder takes, but of course to a much smaller extent. In that, if your startup grows really rapidly, then you have financial as well as growth outcomes which are significantly greater than if you went to a larger company, right? But the risk is much higher. The likelihood of your startup succeeding is much, much smaller, right? So if you look at people, for example, who say spent the last, not last 5 years, but maybe the 5 years before that in, say, a Flipkart, or the last 5 years in a Swiggy, right? And just look at, say, career acceleration. It's been tremendous, right? Of course, as I said, it is something to caveat that it depends a lot on which startups you end up in, right? And whether that startup succeeds. But it is something that, if you are a risk taker at heart, if it's important for you to grow quickly, and not just from a financial perspective or a title perspective, but more that, hey, I'm just really ambitious. I just want to keep building new things. I just want to, like build larger and larger things. Then this is probably a great place for you, right? It's great if you're a founder in the making. If you see yourself as starting up at some point of time, then nothing probably teaches you as well as being a PM in a startup, because it's really close to being a founder. Without a lot of the risks, fortunately for you. But it is something which will teach you a lot of the different things, right? Especially the earlier stage you go. Like if you're at the drunken walk stage and you find a role over there, if you see yourself as being a founder in, say, 2 years from now, it's a great place to learn, because you learn everything from how to do rapid experimentation, how to talk to consumers. You'll be exposed to founders in the way that they think. You'll be exposed to investors in the way that they think, and so on. So you'll just be exposed to all the breadth of things that you'll need to do as a founder yourself. So it's a great place if you want to do a startup yourself, right? The third is, the fish in the pond analogy, right? Like big fish, small pond, small fish, big pond, right? Like whatever it is, right? If you don't care what the size of the pond is, if that's not something that bothers you, it shouldn't bother you if you want to work in a startup. You shouldn't care what pond it is. And what I mean by that is that very often you won't have a brand. It's not something which most people will recognize. There are enough stories of people who say that they work at Ola or Uber, Uber and somebody says, "Are you driving a car?" Not to say that driving a car is bad in any way, but it is something which you have to be okay with, that most people won't know what you're doing. Most people won't know which companies you're working in, and you need to be okay with that. It is definitely not as cool as saying that I work at Amazon, or I work at Google or Microsoft or Oracle or any of these large companies, right? You'll do well if you can learn many things really quickly, right? Because inherent to the job is breadth, right? And you may develop, so there's the famous T-shaped skill development, paradigm or framework, which is that you kind of become good at a lot of different things, and then you pick one or two areas to kind of go really deep. So that's a skill set or a skill development mindset that's really valuable in a startup, which is that, okay, I'm going to be good at, say, so many different things. I'm going to be, say, top 25% product manager in a whole bunch of different things. And I'm going to be like a top 10% product manager or a top 5% product manager in one thing, which is either talking to customers, or technical ability, or working with engineers, or like data and analytics. Pretty much one area that you are really, really good at. And I think that the ability to say that, okay, I'll learn something new, complete different from what I'm doing right, is really, really valuable. And the last is a bias towards action. It is tremendously important because you will be valued for what you execute. You will be, say, measured by what you execute. And in the bias, in the bias for action to, say, striving for excellence, say, this is where you want to be. Okay. I'm going to say here that there are many different kinds of startups, many different kinds of roles. This is a guide. So take it again, like I said, with a tremendous pinch of salt, right? And what doesn't make for a good startup? So this is a startup PM, sorry. So this is exactly the same thing that, a bad PM does, whether it's a small company or a large company. But, be careful of this. You can't be somebody who, say, just wants to build features and, works with engineering that way. I think that that's tremendously important. But that said, this is important whether this is a large company or a small company. Okay, all right. So I've kind of come to the end of the first section, which is, how to think about working at a startup in general. I'll spend some time now talk about how hiring works at a startup. Hopefully by now, you've kind of thought a little about what a startup for a PM actually is like, and in a little more nuanced way than you were earlier. So now, if you do decide that you want to work in a startup, then what do startups look for that's different? And how is it that, the hiring process is different as well, right? So what am I thinking as a product hiring manager, right? Or as a founder for that matter. Some of this I've covered earlier, so I'll skip those parts, or I'll go faster over those parts. First of all, I want somebody who can do product management. And I think that that's obvious, right? So I'm not going to talk about product sense and ability to talk to customers. I'm not going to talk about the ability to work with engineers and so on. I'm just going to assume that those are skills that you have, because that's product 101, and that's something that you'll need to have in any job, right? What I'm going to look for is a breadth of skills. And my evaluation process is going to reflect that. I'm going to look for people who kind of can show that they've done or are capable of doing a lot of these different things. And something that's complementary with that is flexible, right? And wants to learn. So I don't want somebody who comes in and says that, hey, I only want to work on this domain. I only want to work on this kind of a problem. Because inherent to a startup is the fact that there will be a lot of variability in what you're chasing. Even if you look at a hypergrowth startup, look at Swiggy, for example, right? So when they went into hypergrowth, they were, of course, a food delivery company, but they also became a restaurant company in that they had their own cloud kitchens. They also became a loyalty company in that they had Swiggy Super and a whole bunch of other things which kind of try to drive customer experience and loyalty. They did a lot of interesting things on the logistics side. So it's not that you can go in and say that, hey, I'm like a search guy, and I'm only going to work on search. And you can do that, but it limits your value. And at least at that early stage, the depth of problems isn't such that you're going to get that much value out of a PM who's focused specifically on one. The next thing thing really important when I'm looking for people, I find it extremely rare, is people who get the product that I'm working on. And I'm going to spend a couple of minutes talking about this because this is rare and it is incredibly important, right? There is a big difference between a product manager and many other professions in that a product manager is working on a core business function and he is trying to in many ways drive the core business, right? I can write great code very often independently of the business that I'm working in. I doubt that I can be a great product manager if I'm not in a problem space in a domain or in a, say, like an environment where I'm challenged the right way, right? And so when I'm talking to a product manager that I'm looking to hire, I want to understand that he gets my product. I want to understand why he wants to work on this product, right? I very often when I interview, I hear people who say that I want to work at whatever, MyGate or wherever else that I've been, because I want to work in a startup or I want to say be a consumer product manager. See, that tells me nothing. It tells me nothing at all because then that means that this company is interchangeable with 10 other companies out there, right? It doesn't give me anything useful to determine if you're going to be successful over here. Like, are you passionate about solving for a particular kind of consumer problem? Are you passionate about solving for a particular kind of experience problem? Are you passionate about the space? Do you have a thesis on, say, the industry, right? So those are things that excite me because that kind of shows me that you'll do well here, irrespective of whatever skills that you have. And I think that that is really, really important. And that's something which I look for quite a bit, but I find very rarely, right? And the last thing, which again I've starred, is that I'm looking for somebody who's different. And I'll say this carefully, but I'm not looking for somebody who's, I don't know, comes dressed in like an orange hat or something like that. What I mean to say is that when you interview product people or when you interview any particular kind of profession, you realize very soon that most people are the same. They look the same, they behave the same, they talk the same, right? They tell you what you want to hear. They've all learned how to interview. They've learned that, this question, this is the way that you answer. This is what you write in a resume. This is how you say that, okay, I've done XYZ, right? It is very hard to differentiate one candidate from the other. And you're looking for somebody who, through that short process of, say, interviewing or through that short process of hiring, can really differentiate themselves in some way or the other, right? And I'll come to how you can, but it's important for you to stand out. You want that when the debrief happens, that the hiring manager remembers you as a candidate. Maybe this is important for other companies as well, but really important in a startup as well, right? Okay, all right. And the reason that these things are important is because when I'm hiring, I'm obviously desperately looking to hire, but the cost of a wrong hire is very high. And in a large company where you have hundreds of PMs, the cost of a wrong hire is lower because no individual person can really cause as much damage. But if I hire the wrong PM and I put him on a product that is really important to me, or for that matter, even like a part of the product that's important, and they don't do a good job, then that puts you back in a way that, that affects your business, that affects your likely success. And so it's really important for me to find somebody who's got a lot of these different skills, right? Now, I'll come a little to what, as a candidate, very often your experience will be like, right? And some of the things that you'll see when you interview. The first thing that you'll realize when you interview at a startup is that reschedules can happen. You can find the hiring manager doesn't show up. You can find that they ask you arbitrary questions. Like there are some processes where they ask you everything about your past. There are some where they ask you a whole bunch of questions, mostly related to, say, first principles, or it can be primarily about the product that they're building, or it can be about the product that you build. You'll find that there is a lot of variability, right? And it is really hard to find out what you're most likely going to be asked. And this is something that is really important to try and figure out, because in a large company, a lot of this is much more mature and much better sorted, right? So for example, you know that Amazon interviews in a certain way, you know that Google interviews in a certain way, you know Microsoft interviews in a certain way. And it's kind of steady. And you know that these interviewers have been calibrated, you know that they've kind of already figured out what works for them. You'll find that there is a lot of arbitrariness in startups. And this is something that you need to kind of try and deal with. Like, I find that the best way is to ask, Ask the hiring manager what they're looking for. Ask the manager, what kinds, how the interview process is likely to be structured. Ask the, say, recruiter, what are the kinds of questions you're likely to see. Ask for what you're going to be tested on. See, think of it like the way that you would as a product manager, right? You wouldn't build something without asking the consumer their thoughts, their needs, their wants, right? I'm surprised how few product management candidates actually ask this question. So when I ask a question, very few people ask that, what are you really looking to determine from this, right? And the nature of product management questioning is such that it can be vague, even in like a more mature company. I think that asking upfront what somebody's trying to get out of this becomes really important and reflects positively when the question is asked, right? Founders are really, really important. And I think this goes without saying. In a mature company, the process is really organized. Sometimes the hiring manager doesn't even make the final call. You have, say, a set of people who will interview, you have a debrief. Sometimes the hiring committee in a large enough company makes the final hiring call. You will find that no one person really has that much control. The process has control. It's very different in a startup. Like founders and to some extent hiring managers have a lot of control. And it's really important from both perspectives, from your perspective as a candidate and from the founder's perspective or hiring manager's perspective, that there is chemistry, that there is the ability to work together. And so this is something that is quite unique to startups. And I think that's something we should focus on a lot. Founder interviews can also be arbitrary. They can cover a lot of different things. They can be short, they can be 20 minutes. They may not be interviews at all. They may meet you over a cup of coffee, or they may say chat with you over lunch. Of course, pre-COVID, and now nobody's meeting you. So any of those things is possible. So it's really important to keep in mind, though, that what you're trying to do is that whether it's a casual interview or otherwise, this is a really important interview and you're trying to create a positive impression, right? And the last thing that I would say is that referrals mean a lot. And it is because a small company doesn't have access to the kind of resources for hiring that a large company does. It doesn't have the brand. It very often may or may not have the compensation. It doesn't often have the hiring bandwidth and so on, right? So somebody in your company who tells you that this person is good, that is disproportionately valuable, right? So referrals matter a lot. Right. So remember that, and this is, as a startup person, this is, say, a request of sorts, right? Things will not be perfect as far as the hiring process is concerned, because like with everything else, resources and time are scarce, right? So hiring is also a process which is getting improved at the startup. So be patient. Don't be surprised at the arbitrariness. It's not that people are rude or are trying to make you wait or trying to make you uncomfortable or any of those things. It's just the nature of the beast. You have uncalibrated interviewers. You have people who are more unorganized, who are doing 10 other things, who don't have, say, 4 hours allocated for a hiring, say, like very often in a large company, you'll have 3 or 4 hours just for an interview, which means that you'll have an hour to prepare, you'll do the interview, then you'll go back and you'll write the feedback. It's like 3 to 4 hours of time that you spend on it. Startups, very rarely do you have that luxury. So there will be more arbitrariness. There will be more, say, breaks. There will be things which will not work as smoothly. So just keep that in mind. And I think that is something that, you'll see, right? On a lighter note, and I mentioned that, being different in some ways is important. I don't mean to say that, be different by lying in an interview. Don't be different, for the sake of being different. What I mean is do things which actually allow you to stand out, right? Remember that the hiring manager is working with a limited data set, right? He wants to hire you, right? But at the same time, he's got limited time, limited resources, and limited data to make the hire, right? And an interview process, as you've all experienced in life, is extremely limited, right? Like it gives you a brief insight into the way that a candidate thinks, okay? So try and do a few of these things, they'll help. Try and build credibility before you interview. There are lots of ways of doing this, especially today, where there are so many public interfaces. So write a blog if you don't, write on LinkedIn, tweet. Think about product management and communicate your thoughts. Put a link to your blog or your Twitter on your resume. It'll help. If you are moving from a non-product background to a product background, show that you're proactive. build a product on the side. I mean, if you really, this is something that you're going to do as a career, then invest the time to see if it is something that you enjoy. If you're in a company, which is a product company as it is, try and do something that's product related, work with the product team, do some user research, help them in some way, try and see if it's something that you actually want to do, and then showcase those things. Try and build credibility before you interview, because that is rare and it will help you stand out, right? Have an industry and product thesis. Like if somebody asks you, why do you want to work in my company? And you tell them that, this is what I think about this industry. This is how I think it's going to evolve. This is how, all of these different forces come into play. And your product is kind of like placed well to capture some of that value. That shows me that you're a business thinker. It shows me that you've thought about this space. It gives me something to work with. And it gives me something far more valuable than just asking you a product question, right? Try and showcase a breadth of skills. Again, a lot of different ways to do it, through the different things that you can do, different examples that you can highlight when you're in an interview process. Breadth is really, really important. So try and showcase that. Do something that shows me that you want to work here. So, I made a hire where somebody who reached out to us, who had written a blog about MyGate and like what MyGate should do, and it was great analysis. And I thought that, okay, somebody who really thinks about the problem, who thinks about the company that he wants to work at, who's got a business view on things, who's got a product view on things, to me, that's really, really valuable. And it showcases that you will do well here, because it comes back to what I said earlier, right? Which is that you get my product. It's not just that you're a product guy in general, but you get my product, right? So remember that no founder that I know wants to hire somebody just because you want to work at a startup, because a startup is just a phase of a company, right? So, I mean, if you come and tell me that you want to work here because you like working at startups, I mean, that tells me nothing. It gives me nothing to work with, right? We want to hire somebody who want to work in this startup, right? And who want to work in this company. And I guess it's true for larger companies as well, but you really do want to work for have somebody work with you who's passionate about what you're working on. And I think that is really, really valuable, okay? So this brings me to the last section. I think, Kaustav, how much time do we have? I'll spend time accordingly.
Mansur, if we can wind it up within the next 5 minutes, it would be really great.
Okay, awesome, right. Cool. So the next thing is finding the right role. This is much more like practical advice in terms of how do you actually go about finding a role and how do you evaluate a role. So there are two parts to this. So the first one, right? Okay, so now you've decided that you want to work at a startup. You have an understanding of how hiring works. Now, how do you go out and actually get a role, right? My best advice is work from an industry thesis, right? Because your likelihood of finding a startup that you enjoy working at is much higher. So for example, it's COVID right now. You may have a thesis that, okay, this changes the way that people communicate, or this changes the way that people, more obvious, it changes the way that people get educated, right? So you have a thesis on, say, edtech. And based on your thesis on edtech, you find a bunch of companies that are in the space, and you look for companies that are at the right stage, which match the stage that you want to work at, right? Crunchbase or any other startup news is a great source of information, right? Because as I said, like a company that goes into hypergrowth, that's done its Series B, Series C, is very often at a point of time when they're hiring aggressively. It's a great time and place to get hired, right? So that's like really, really valuable information. Job boards are useful, some more than the others. Like AngelList, for example, is great for startups. LinkedIn is also great for startups. There are recruiters who specialize in working with startups, and it's very often city dependent. Like in Bangalore, for instance, I don't know who it is right now, but like 5-6 years ago, it used to be that CareerNet used to do all the startup jobs. Like they used to have all the linkages with the startup companies, and they used to do a lot of the startup jobs. So if you found linkages there, then you'd know what are the roles that are out there. So finding recruiters who specialize in working with startups very often helps. And your network, and which kind of ties back into sorry, how referrals work and why referrals are really, really important. Something that works, but I would not recommend, is spamming somebody on LinkedIn, right? And the reason I say spamming is because there are nice ways of doing this. So if you, for example, with an industry thesis, with a product thesis, with a particular company in mind, you reach out to a hiring manager and say that, hey, this is something that I think is a great space to be in, and I've done XYZ in this space, and I think I could add a lot of value. Would you be interested in looking at my profile? I think that's great, right? But the vast majority, 99% of the reach outs that hiring managers get on LinkedIn is something to the effect of, I'm interested in working at your company, right? And it's not that as a hiring manager, you're rude. It's not that you don't want to reply, but it's just that there are, there are so many requests and there's no meaningful way for you to reply to it, right? Like I can't reply to it saying that I don't think you're a fit because I haven't really evaluated you, but it's just too large. You haven't given me anything to evaluate you by, right? And I'm also trading this off against all the other things that I'm spending time on. So this doesn't often work, but if done well, it can. But I'd say that pick the right company, pick the right stage, pick the right industry. And then if you can kind of build a thesis around this and communicate that effectively, I think that you'll find that, there will be people who will be interested, right? Now, think like an investor. This is a little bit about approaching a role and at the same time, how to evaluate a startup as well, right? See, an investor is spending money on a company, and money, of course, is the real deal, but it's one of many things that they're investing in. You are going to spend 100% of your next 2, 3, 5, 10 years in this company, right? Be as prudent and do the same level of diligence, right? Don't just go in and say that I want to work at a startup or I want to work at your startup. Understand who the customers are, talk to them if you can, understand how the product creates value for them, understand what are the strengths of the products, what are the limitations of the product, what's the go-to-market, how are they doing this. Build your own thesis on the company because you are investing your most valuable asset into this organization, right? So do the diligence and do say as much as what an investor does at the very least, right? Because it is your time. Be really, really careful with it. And you only have a fixed number of years to work. So use them well, right? And it will also help because when you talk to, so I've had people who've reached out to me and talked to me and, in conversation, they'll say that I spoke to guards and, this is our learnings, right? And for me, this is fantastic. It showcases everything that I want to look at, right? That, okay, you're interested in the space. You are truly a product manager. You actually went out and spoke to customers. You're comfortable with that. You have a product thesis. And at the same time, you're proactive, right? So it ticks all the boxes that I'm looking at, right? So very, very important. Try and do this. You can't do this for 20 companies, but you shouldn't be looking at 20 companies also. So I'd say that, every company that you're seriously interested in, spend a day at least doing something of this kind, right? Okay. Some of the important but unusual or unconventional things to look at before you decide on a company. More than anything else, the founders. They will control very often the fate of the organization. They will control the culture of the organization. They will control what you get out of the organization, right? So think deeply about your interactions with them, what questions you asked them, what they responded, how they responded, how they're approaching building the business, the decisions that they've made, are they right, are they wrong, what their history is, and so on and so forth. It's really important, right? Remember, if you read if you read what VCs write, right? Like VCs will say that 80% of the decision to invest in the company or not is purely based on the founders, right? Again, they're investing their money, you're investing your 100% of your time. So if they are investing based on somebody, you can be assured that that is probably the most important thing to look at that, right? Second, be very clear when you're talking to hiring manager, what kind of team that you would be working with. What's the engineering team that you're going to be working with? It is very easy to get hired into a role where you have no engineering control or very little engineering control. And as a product person, you have very little control over an outcome if you don't have an engineering team to work with. It is very important to get this right. What the organization thinks is product management. So if you go and look at, say, a whole bunch of literature on product management, the most common article that you'll see or topic that you'll see is what is product management? And this is written by product managers. So when product managers can't decide what product management is, I am not surprised that most organizations don't know what it is. And it's a relatively young field. So people think it's everything from project management to actually what product management is to, say, some kind of a user research role and so on. So understand very clearly what the organization thinks is product management. Understand it from your interviews, understand it from your conversations, very important. And the last thing is figure out what is the kind of engineering team that this org has. Is it like a really solid engineering team? Do they hire great people? Because this, more than anything else, will define your ability to produce great work, right? Go onto LinkedIn, look at the profiles of the engineering leaders, look at the profiles of the engineering team, where they worked, what they've done. Try and get a sense of how good the engineering team is, because this is really, really important, right? Remember, a startup is really risky. It's not just because it may come burn, but it's because there are so many things that are unknown. If you want to work at a Google, Amazon, Microsoft, right? Most of the nature of the company is well defined. You can look up Glassdoor, you can talk to people over there. A lot of things are process defined, a lot of things are well known. A startup is not that way at all. They are all different. Every one of them is different, right? So make the effort because it will be worthwhile. And last thing is that look at culture. And when I say look at culture, I'm not saying look at the company values and mission, because those are a reflection of what the company wants to be or what they think that they are already, right? It is very often not what they actually are, right? So look for the cues when you talk to founders. What do they value? What have they built in the past? How do they think about products? Ask them questions and see how they respond to that. Don't ask them what is the culture of the company. That's bullshit. And they'll respond with, whatever is the stated set of values. Ask them how they think about something like striving for excellence versus building quickly, right? Use the time that you're interacting with them. Look for who the leaders are. Look for where they come from. So product leader from Amazon who spent like 5 years at Amazon and is now product head for this company probably is bringing a lot of an Amazon way of thinking, because that's kind of where he's learned and he's become good. Same with Google, same with Facebook, same with Microsoft, same with every other company, right? So look for where the product leaders, all leaders, but especially the product leaders are. Look at Glassdoor, look at what people who work there say. If you find somebody in your network, great, but talk to people who worked there who work there, right? People who've left and who've stayed, right? Understand what's great, what's not great about the company. Look at attrition. Look at like whether people stay for a short time, stay for a long time. Do people quit in 6 months? Do they spend like 3 years, 5 years there? This is really important because this will often tell you whether this is a place that is a good place to work at. And the eyeball test. So when you're there and when you interact with people, whether your interviews, people around you, is there a positive buzz? Is there energy? Are people, really, I mean, a lot of things you can just often get from the feel of the office. And hopefully at some point of time, we'll go back to working in an office. So whenever you do get to go back to an office and interview there, what I suggest is try and look around, try and get a sense of what the atmosphere, what the, say, energy is like. It makes a big difference, right? And the last thing is that don't count on this to change. It may change, it may not change, it most likely will not, right? Most people will say that, hey, we've got this HR guy, we're going to adopt these leadership principles, we're going to do this and that. I've seen that very often the culture of a company does not change. So based on what you've learned, conclude whether this is the right place for you or not. Do not go by what you think is going to happen. Don't think that I'll be the guy to come in and change the culture. Very rarely does that happen. Don't be the guy who thinks that something is going on and new people are being hired and the culture will change. It is not likely to happen. And it is, I mean, it may happen, may not happen. It's a risk, but don't count on it happening. All right. So yeah, so that is all that I have to say. I hope that this was useful. And I didn't follow Dilbert's advice and shorten my presentation too much. So I hope that it wasn't too long. I hope that it was useful. Thank you so much for your time. And if you take away just one or two things from this, take away, startups are not a single monolith. They're not homogeneous. There are many different kinds. They need different kinds of people. So figure out what's right for you. Take away that, the kind of people that they are looking for and try and see if that's right for you. And take away how they hire and how you can actually get hired. So hopefully that's something that you'll actually find practically useful in your journey. All right, so I am done. Oh yeah, just one last thing. These are a few of the references. Choosing your next company. Nikhil Singhal is like a great guy as far as writing about product careers is concerned. Definitely read his writing. Shreyas Doshi is probably the best person to follow as far as product management thought is concerned. If you follow no one else in the world, please follow him, because I would say that other than core product management insights, which are fantastic, just the way he thinks about product management careers and the function is outstanding. He has something outstanding to say almost every week. Fantastic thinker. And yeah, Paul Graham, if you want to learn anything about startups. Yeah. Thank you so much for your time. Happy to take questions now.
Sure. Thank you so much, Mansur. It was a really insightful session. So already in the middle of the session itself, we started receiving some really good questions. I would just quickly read out a few of them to you. And maybe you can just address this. So
Happy
the
to.
first question is from Mr. Mayank. So Mr. Mayank says, "Hi Mansur, how do you figure out quantitatively if we are still doing the drunken walk or have moved to the product market fit and so on? An example would help."
Okay, all right. See, I think that this is first of all, thanks, Mike. I think this is a great question, and I'll try and answer your question at two levels, right? Um, See, I think that the first level of when a company is actually doing the drunken walk versus finding product fit is more straightforward. Um, if you are in a consumer company, there is a certain level of virality to your core offering. You are able to acquire new users without spending a lot of money. Then it kind of shows that you have stumbled onto something that works, right? And hopefully the company would be smart enough to understand that and start investing over there. Another great sign is usually a Series A, because Series A is kind of like the cutoff where, I mean, like what I've seen is that like series beyond, like B, C, D, E, can kind of coincide with different stages. But Series A usually roughly coincides with a company who has figured out a core insight and is now doubling down on that core insight. And really that's what you're trying to look at. So if you talk to a company and they say that, okay, we are a food delivery company and we're trying to provide convenience of quick food ordering through our own fleet, right? So they've kind of figured out the specific offering. On the other hand, they say that, okay, we're trying to solve for food. Now, if you're trying to solve for food, there are a bunch of different ways that you can actually do that. And it shows that you're still at the point where you are iterating across different kinds of solutions, right? I'd say that quantitatively it's hard. I would say that maybe looking at, say, the Series A metric is probably more meaningful than, I mean, if you're looking at, say, a specific metric to look at. But I would say that a lot of it is in an understanding of what problem that particular company or particular product actually solves, right? Now, there is though a caveat, right? And what I showed you, and what I showed you in terms of, the way that companies evolve from one stage to another, right? Is not always reflected in the way that the founders think or the team thinks, right? So it is possible that a company has figured out what actually works, but is still doing a lot of iteration, right? And like it's like from a product perspective, they've kind of found product fit, but from a mindset perspective, they're still in the drunken walk stage. They're still trying too many different things, and that is something to be careful about. A lot of this, I would suggest, is to, I mean, like in terms of how to figure this out, the first step is look at the product itself and figure out if you can answer, say, all of these questions, right? Can you clearly articulate who the customer segments are, what the product value proposition is, what are the strengths and weaknesses, and do they have a go-to-market approach? If you have an answer to all of these questions, then that company probably has found product fit, right? And if the people that you speak to at that company, whether it's a product person or a founder, those two more important than anybody else, if they can also very singularly articulate these things, then you have found product fit. And sorry, then they have found product fit, and they have understood that they've found product fit as well, right? So that's what I'd suggest that you look at. I hope that answered the question.
It does. Thank you.
So Mansur, we have one more question from Shankar Dhanraj. He says,
Sure.
Though the markets don't look for PMs at the drunken walk and product market fit stages, do you think a strong PM being involved early in the cycle can make a real difference?
So companies do hire at Series A stage, which corresponds roughly to product fit stage. They don't tend to hire so much before that. So most companies don't tend to hire pre-series. I mean, most pre-series A companies don't tend to hire product people. And would they add value? Potentially, yes, but would they get the chance or opportunity to exhibit that value? Probably no, right? See, remember, a startup is a manifestation of a founder's vision, right? And much more so early on rather than later in the life cycle of a company, right? And see, that's why like all startups are associated with the founders, right? Whether it's Steve Jobs or Bill Gates or anyone, you kind of think about the earlier, especially the earlier stage the company is, you kind of think about the startup synonymously with the founder, right? So that early, you are probably, as an organization, trying to figure out the best way to execute that founder's vision, right? So as a product person, yes, can you come in and say that, okay, I'll use say lean canvas and I'll figure out the right way to get to product market fit? Yes. Will you be given the opportunity to? Probably not. So I would say be very careful when you look at a role in that company. Now, there are always exceptions, but I would argue that the risk for you as a product person in joining a company at that stage is disproportionately high. So I'm not sure that it would add a lot of value. On the other hand, once a company reaches Series A, they have just begun to say want to develop more formal process. So they want to develop a process to understand consumers, to get product inputs, consumer inputs into building product, a more formal way of say working with an engineering team and so on. So that is where very often they will hire a product manager. Their first product hire will happen at that stage. And it will usually be somebody who's say a senior product manager at a Flipkart or Swiggy, Amazon, somebody who's got say 4 or 5 years of experience and who's kind of understood product really well and is looking for the next stage for themselves, right? Like grow a small team, build product process, who wants to work in a startup. They will hire somebody of that kind, maybe 1 or 2 more people. So it's if you're looking for an early stage role, like an early stage role, that is actually a great place to join, great place and time to join. The only caveat is that when you join, you'll spend a lot more time, like the product fit itself has been established. So if you think about product management as, okay, there is a large solution space and you're iterating within the solution space, right, till you find something. Initially, you're doing like a lot of different circles or iterations till you find something that works. Okay, once you've found something that works, you're doing much smaller iteration to improve that up to a point of time where your business model has been established. And then at that point of time, you're going to again do rapid iteration to try and innovate, right? So this is kind of that in-between phase where you found product fit and you're doing some evolution to the product, but it's not say significant innovation. So it's great from the perspective of like, if you're a product person who, okay, I've been an SPM for a few years now, and I want to build product process. I want to build my own product thesis. I want to say build a team and so on and so forth. It's a great role for you. If you're somebody who says that, okay, I want to go in there and I want to like figure out the next new product for them to build and really innovate over there, probably not such a great role. So I'd say that keep that in mind when you're looking at roles at that stage. And thanks, Shankar. It was a good question.
So I think we have time to take one more question.
Sure.
So this is from Ashish. How to choose between working as a consultant versus full-time PM from an influence point of view?
Okay, thanks Ashish for the question. And again, I'm going to caveat this by saying that your mileage will definitely vary with this. But I have a strong view that product management is not something that can be done as a consultant, or it can't be done effectively as a consultant, right? Because product management is inherently a depth function, right? I'll give you a slight analogy before I come to this, right? See, if you're the founder of a company, and like one of the common complaints that many founders have is that they go into these VC meetings and the VC says something which is like really trivial, or he says that, hey, have you thought about this? And the founder is like, yeah, of course I've thought about this and XYZ, right? And they come out and they're like, see, these guys don't really get my business. But what is important to try and realize is that the reason that they are, and remember, VCs are like very smart, like very highly educated, very successful themselves and so on, right? So why is it that very rarely do they come up with an insight that as a founder, irrespective of how good or bad a founder you are, it's very rare that they get an insight that you don't have, right? And the reason is because you have spent so much time thinking about the problem. You have lived and say immersed yourself into the problem. So you know how consumers think, the first level, say you have the first level insights already, you've thought about those and now you have second level thoughts about that. You've thought about those and you have third level thoughts about that, right? Now, the person who you're talking to is going to be, at best, he's going to be able to connect with you at a certain level. And product management is very much like that, right? Like, I won't say give you the specific example, but there was a role in a previous company where you know like I was say running a particular product, and we brought in an external consulting, super high profile name, like pretty much the biggest product name in India. I mean, in the consulting space, right? And great guy. He had some really interesting ideas, but frankly, from a product insight perspective, he had hardly anything that we hadn't thought of. And it wasn't because he's not a smart guy. He's probably like super smart and much smarter than anyone in our team. But it's just that like we are so immersed in the problem that we really understand it a lot more, and we've kind of iterated on say our insights themselves, right? And so my view is that product is extremely hard to do effectively as a consultant. And I would say, and this is from an effectiveness perspective. Now, from an enjoyment perspective, see, product people are fundamentally builders, right? Like at the end of the day, we got into this because we love building stuff. I mean, if I were to say one thing that kind of unifies everyone on product management is a really painful job in most ways. Like we have so much of say, so many things we need to do, so many things that we need to get done, all the blame and none of the success. So it is a painful job in many, many ways, but it is a fantastic job because you get to build. And if that is the mindset with which you approach product management, then it is something where it's very hard to enjoy it all that much as a consultant, right? Like I've talked to many, many people who were consultants or are consultants, and the single complaint that they have is that, okay, I've just provided inputs, but it's not really manifested itself, or it got built, but it didn't get built the way that I wanted it to. You only see it through one iteration. You don't see, it really evolving and so on. So net, it's one of those things where I would say that, if you want to be a product manager, please, please, please do it full time. It is, in my view, one of the most fulfilling, enriching, challenging, enjoyable jobs out there. Like I feel blessed that I kind of stumbled into this profession. Don't do it half-assed. Don't do it without conviction. Don't do it in companies that don't respect product management or don't enjoy it. And don't do it as a consultant, because it's very hard to get anything worthwhile or meaningful out of it. Again, like I said, your mileage may vary. This is purely my view on the subject. So, happy to connect offline and talk about this in more detail, or answer a more specific question about, say, some specific role that you have in mind. But net, I'd say that it is a profession that should be done full time and with full conviction and throwing yourself at the problem. I hope that answered the question.
Thank you so much, Mansur, for the insights. I'm really sure that all of them would be going back today with a lot more knowledge than they had about getting hired in startups and about product management as a whole. So thank you so much for that.
Thanks so much, Kausav. I would just say one last thing, that there are a lot of interesting questions in the chat, which I think unfortunately we don't have time to take. So I've put out my LinkedIn information. Let me just okay. Okay, you can find me on LinkedIn. I'm Mansur Nazimuddin on LinkedIn. So feel free to reach out to me on LinkedIn. I'll share my number. We can chat about this, and happy to say. Actually, I'll just put my phone number in the chat itself. So if anybody who wants to reach out to talk about anything in more detail, happy. I mean, just WhatsApp me and we'll set up a time to talk.
That's great. That's really great of you, to extend the hand to have a really nice conversation with our cohorts. So thank you so much again, Mansur, for being over here and taking this 1 hour of time to give some valuable insights to our cohorts. Also, to all the participants who joined a little bit late, at the beginning we had told to take up the survey. So you can just scan this QR code and take up the survey, help us understand what are your thoughts about this particular session. And definitely we will take it into consideration. It would be highly appreciated if you could please take a few seconds to give us this feedback. I'll just keep it for a few more seconds, and so that you can scan it. Okay. So Mansur, this is a very small token of appreciation from our end. It's a certificate of appreciation that we from Institute of Product Leadership want to present you as for your valuable contribution towards this, for this wonderful session that you conducted with us.